So welcome to World War II, complete, ultimate breakdown, part 8. Now we ended part 7, okay, with the attack on the Low Countries, the season of bridges, airports, airfields, river crossings, for the attack on the Low Countries and Belgium and the advance into those areas, the bombing of Rotterdam. We ended with the massive German attack in the Ardennes, which saw the French cavalry and armoured units comprising 300 tanks and infantry and cavalry facing off against over 2,000 German tanks that succeeded in punching and crushing a hole in the French line 81 miles wide, of which those 2,200 German tanks went streaming towards the Channel. So, basically we covered over, okay, when the French first started issuing orders for the area to be reinforced via the trains, the 500 trains and the vehicles. Now the German bombers had launched pinpoint attacks and disrupted and damaged much of rail network, meaning those reinforcements could not get there. Now that disruption, okay, also caused a general delay of like 24 to 48 hours before the first troops intended for sectors at 6th and 7th Armies arrived on scene, which is a lot of time for the panzers to be moving and the Germans to be consolidating their positions. Some units were delayed because they were under constant aerial attack, while others were forced to set out premature, so they weren't fully equipped. You know, the track vehicles at 2nd Army Division became pinned down on a stretch of railway 75 miles long. The wheeled vehicles at Division struggling along roads become separated from tanks, and so the 2nd Armoured Division was scattered into a shower of small uncoordinated detachments and could certainly not play any part in plugging the 81-mile gap. Now up at the front, okay, the Germans made good use of chaos in Allied camp. The Germans were very organised, efficient, following their plan to the letter, and as night fell on May 16th, the 7th Panzer Division forced the French-Belgian border frontier near Sols-le-Château. Okay, any commander other than Rommel would have been satisfied, but Rommel drove on through the night, surprised Avences at midnight, dashed past Landrecies and arriving before Le Château on dawn on the 17th after a breathtaking advance of over 30 miles overnight with his army. He'd scattered the surviving units at 18th Division and 1st Armoured Division, sweeping in thousands of prisoners who the Germans barely had time to disarm and process and deal with. Above everything else, Rommel, with his lightning-fast strike, had completely thrown the rear areas at 9th Army into complete confusion. Now, basically at GHQ, Hitler was not quite as optimistic as his frontline commanders. Halder argued that the Allies were not strong enough to launch a counterattack towards Sedan and that the panzers could be allowed to thrust forward without any unreasonable risk. However, Hitler remained paralysed with anxiety, okay, and at noon, 12 a.m. On the 17th, after a visit to OKW with Brauchwitz, the Führer was still not quite getting so excited. Meanwhile, the 16th Panzer Corps under Hoppner, including the 3rd and 4th Panzer Divisions, had also been now transferred to Rundstedt's Army Group A, the main attack thrust through the Ardennes and through the Sedan. Now, this meant that 9 Panzer Divisions, okay, were now operated. Now, as I broke down before, 7 of the Panzer Divisions were in Rundstedt's Army Group A, the other Panzer Divisions were in the Northern Group, but now 2 more had been transferred to Rundstedt's Army Group A, which meant 9 of the 10 active Panzer Divisions were now in that area. So the 2,200 German tanks were now pushing towards 2,900 German tanks in that army group. Now, those panzer divisions were followed by 6 motorised divisions, now operating on Billot's right flank and driving across his rear. Billot withdrew to the Escau line, okay, but it was constantly being hampered, not only by the attacks of Army Group B, but by the Luftwaffe's attacks and the disorganised flood of refugees. Everywhere there were floods of refugees everywhere, which when the Allied armies are trying to move units and travel along movement pathways, it makes it much more difficult to get bogged down. So in all the confusion, okay, it's not surprising that all the reinforcements for Girard's army were sent in vain and came through in a disorganised manner. Okay, rendezvoused in meaningless areas. They didn't have a clue what was going on. It was just not a very good way at all. So then on May 17th up to May 19th, okay, raids were launched against the left flank of the 19th Panzer Corps by the French 4th Armoured Division. But those raids made virtually no difference, okay? They made no difference to the outcome now. But there were an idea, to the Germans that the French army still had some fight in them. On 15th of May, Charles de Gaulle set up his headquarters at Bures, south of Laon, on. And on 17th, he struck towards Montcornet with all the forces at his disposal. He penetrated 21 miles, but then was forced to halt his army, and forces came under vicious attacks by Stuka dive bombers as well as other Luftwaffe units, for which it was not defended by corresponding air power. So basically, de Gaulle had to withdraw, leaving behind a number of prisoners. Now, on May 19th, de Gaulle, slightly reinforced, but still not fully equipped, attacked again at dawn. This time, de Gaulle's objective was the bridges across the Serre and the Marly-Fair Road, vital to Panzer Division in their westward advance between Oise and Amiens. On that day, Guderian recalled that his tanks had succeeded in penetrating to within a mile, of his advanced tank. The German tanks had succeeded in penetrating to near within a mile of his command centre, which only had some 20mm anti-aircraft guns for protection. And in early afternoon at 19th, de Gaulle received Georges' order to break off the attack. Stuka dive bombers were still savaging the French tanks, the French supply lanes, communication centres, bridges, everything. So basically, the disorientation caused by the rapid attack through the Ardennes, was still causing absolute mayhem, and the French basically could not, organise properly. So basically, during all this time, from Arras, which was still in Allied hands, to the Somme, the French 7th Army was trying to speed into there, a distance of only 25 miles. But they were attacked from the north and the south, and basically in a pincer movement, they would try and cut off the spearhead of the German armoured column before the German infantry and motorised units could catch up. But this U-turn, meant that 26 French and British divisions under his orders meant that the Belgian army must fall back immediately from the Escaut to the Year. General von Osterstraten, speaking for Belgium King, objected that such a prolonged retreat would have disastrous consequences on the morale and discipline of Belgian troops, having to withdraw. They had put up spirited resistance, but that resistance was now waning. Now Weygand, who landed at Cherbourg at 0500 hours on 22nd of May, by noon he received Renaud, Churchill and Generals Dill and Ismay and Admiral Air Marshal Percy at his headquarters. By that time, Weygand had received good news that King Leopold had agreed that the Belgian army should be redeployed in conformity with his plan. So Weygand, come up with another plan, a multi-point plan. The first plan was the Belgian army should retire to the line of the Yare River and that the country should be flooded, to hamper the German advance. Secondly, as soon as possible, and certainly by following day, the British and French should attack towards Bassoumi and Canberra with about 8 divisions. And third, at the outcome of that battle, which would have vital for the Allies to succeed, the Royal Air Force should give maximum support by day and night as long as the battle lasted. So he calls for a new spearhead attack by 8 French and British divisions, supported by the RAF. Notice there's not much mention of the French Air Force. The new French army group headed towards Amiens and forming a front along the Somme should thrust north to effect a junction, with British forces in the region of Bapaume. Basically, all this is just not doing much good, really. He's just not doing much good. Now, Wayland's plan, logical as it was, meant that the 8 Allied divisions should have attacked towards Bapaume and Canberra on the 23rd, did not attack on that day, not on the 24th, That was because General Bilot had been killed in a senseless car accident shortly after the Ypres conference, a severe loss to Allies. So, basically, they lost one of the most energetic commanders. Now, given this gloomy state of affairs, Gort's first reaction had been to prepare for the BEF's retirement to Dunkirk. Now, Churchill dissuaded him from that plan, and with equal loyalty, Gort revised his plans to associate his troops in the southern counterattack with the French First Army. Now, on 21st of May, the British attacked at Arras with Frank Force, 2 divisions, the 5th and the 50th, and 74 tanks of the 1st Army Tank Brigade. The attack surprised the 7th Panzer Division and the SS Tokenhof, which were bypassing south at town, and was at first successful. They took nearly 400 prisoners, but frankly, the British tanks were finally driven back under principal fire of the devastating 88 anti-aircraft guns, which made mincemeat of their tanks. And on 21st, only part of French 3rd Light Mechanised Brigade took part in British counterattack. Not until 24th did the 25th Motorised Division advance from Cambrai under successive attacks by Stuka Ju-87 dive bombers. Now, by this time, the Panzer forces had handed over the watch on the Somme to motorised troops of the 14th Corps and had struck out anew towards the north and northeast. Now, Boulogne and Calais were besieged, and 1st Panzer Division established a bridgehead across the A Canal, less than 13 miles from Dunkirk. Now, at this stage, the British in Arras were 46 miles from Dunkirk. So basically now the Panzers pretty much reaching the North Sea and Channel coast. Now, so when Gort's Frank force, retired from Arras on evening at 23rd, and then on 25th broke away from manoeuvre laid down for 1st Army Group, everything was going crazy now. Guderian could have reached Dunkirk and Malo-les-Bains on the evening of following day. Now, Hitler issued an halt order before the tragedy of Dunkirk. Now, Hitler wished to spare the BEF the humiliation of total surrender in order to gain the favour of the British and make them more amenable to a settlement. Now, one thing about this, Adolf Hitler long courted the British Empire as the perfect example of how Germany could take a worldwide empire and successfully run it as Britain had for hundreds of years, including taking these territories. Now, the fact is, the order, which spared 9 British divisions and over 100,000 French troops from captivity, was sent to the German 4th Army by telephone after a visit by Hitler to Rundstedt's headquarters at Charleville on May 24th. Now, according to War Diary of Army Group A, published by German historian Hans Adolf Jakobsen, it would appear Hitler made this decision after a similar suggestion had been made to him by Rundstedt. It's hardly surprising that even after the event, Rundstedt did not claim the credit for the whole order. Of course, that credit would be given to Adolf Hitler. But basically, the French and British armies were now virtually cut off against the coast. Now, at this time, Belgium's strength began to fade. It was clear that the war was going wrong, and it was clear they were not going to be able to stop. Now, the Belgian army, had been retreating from the Scheldt to the Lys when Antwerp and Brussels were surrendered on May 17th on the orders at Belgium High Command. Another segment of Belgian territory had been abandoned without a fight. Nevertheless, the Belgians rallied to a call of their king, holding on valiantly along their front, which ran from the Leopold II Canal to the Lys Canal along the line of the Lys, joining the left flank of the BEF, the British Expeditionary Force, at Menin. Now, on May 24th, the German 6th Army broke through the new position, Courtrai, revealing Richelieu's intention of driving towards Ypres and cutting off the Belgian army from the BEF. Now, the Belgians hit back as best they could. 2 reserve divisions entered the line, and the fine showing of the 8th Division and the 2nd Chasseurs Ardennes Division limited the effective German breakthrough, but the Germans still broke through. Now, on 25th, the 12th Panzer Division, launched timely and vigorous attacks, but the Belgians counteract. So basically, on May 26th, the Belgian army was still fighting, but its right was bending under renewed attacks by Richelieu, and its left was yielding ground before the German 18th Army advancing from the direction of Antwerp. So the battle was renewed at dawn on 27th, and at 12:30 hours, King Leopold informed Gort that the moment is rapidly approaching. This is King Leopold's statement. He said, the moment is rapidly approaching when our troops will no longer be able to fight. The king will be forced to capitulate to avoid disaster. 2 hours later after that, the king gave General Champon, chief at French military mission, a note which told the same story. Belgian resistance is reaching the end of its tether. Our front is fraying like a worn-out breaking rope. In centre of the front, a breach 3 to 4 mile wide were opened in the Thelt area on the left. The 17th Panzer Division, 17th Division, was on the point of collapse, and from above, the Stukas and the Luftwaffe kept up their aerial bombardments. Behind the lines, were a population of 800,000, refugees wandering around. King Leopold overruled the advice of General van Overstraten, who wanted to wait until the following day, and sent the envoy to German lines to discuss the Belgian surrender. That surrender came through over the coming time, and by May 28th, the fighting between Belgium and Germany was over after 18 days of fighting. But I think the Belgians did quite well to last 18 days. Now, one fact is at least clear, however. The Belgian surrender sealed the fate of French French First Army around Lille. Now, both flanks at First Army were now laid bare, and only 25 miles separated Hoth's panzer group at La Bassée from Richelieu's forces at Menin on the French left. So the Germans were close to committing a massive encirclement, and also the BEF and French troops were now very close to being penned to the English Channel around the Dunkirk region. So May 28th, taking Kassel and the Mont de Flandre, the Germans closed the ring around the French 4th and 5th Corps, which were dug in around Lille loose. These forces put up a heroic resistance, but when they surrendered, General Wager, commander of the German 28th Corps, honoured them with a guard of honour from the 25th Division. General Molinier, the French commander, was allowed to retain his staff car. Now, General Priou would not abandon his brave comrades of the 4th and 5th Corps. He hung on his headquarters at Steenwerk and was captured there at 12:45 hours on the 29th. The resistance all over is collapsing. Up morning at 29th, he reported to Admiral Abrial, commanding at Dunkirk, with his 12th and 32nd Divisions and part of 1st Motorised Division. The survivors at Cavalry Corps did useful flank guard service during the harrowing retreat. Now, Fagaldi's 16th Corps were holding the Dunkirk beachhead with 60th and 68th Divisions. Now, unfortunately, following the strict instruction laid down by British High Command, they had to abandon most of their heavy weapons and a good deal of ammunition before they were allowed to withdraw into the Dunkirk zone, which caused some recrimination between the Allies. Now, on the same day, May 29th, the embarkation of the BEF reached an encouraging figure. On that day, May 29th, over 47,000 British troops were evacuated, while on 27th and 28th, the total had only been 25,000 for both days. Now, the credit for this success undoubtedly must go to Vice Admiral Sir Bertram Ramsay, Flag Officer Dover. Now, 4 years later, Ramsay's energy resourcefulness will be put to far better use, planning the reinvasion of France in 1944. So it's fascinating, that Ramsay is supervising the withdrawal of soldiers from the Dunkirk region, and then 4 years later, he would also be one of the people planning the reinvasion of France. So basically, Churchill suggested that as a precautionary measure, the Admiralty should assemble a large number of small vessels in readiness to proceed to ports and inlets on the French coast to start picking up prisoners. Now, in all, some 850 commercial boats were taken over by Admiralty, which were agreed with some reluctance in view it needs Atlantic convoys to detach 39 destroyers to escort these 850 ships. But Ramsay did not content himself with putting the precious destroyers on purely defensive duties. In teeth at German bombers, magnetic mines and torpedo boats, he did not hesitate to use the destroyers to embark troops from the port of Dunkirk and from beaches at Malo, Les Bains, Bray Dunes and Depan, just north of Dunkirk. Now, Operation Dynamo, as the evacuation was called, formally went into operation at 18:57 hours on May 26. Informed too late of the British intentions, the French were only able to make a comparatively feeble contribution. It wasn't until the 28th, that basically a flotilla which numbered 300 vessels of all tonnages, including 15 destroyers and torpedo boats under French command, also started to take part in the Dunkirk evacuation. Now, on May 30th, 120,000 men, including 6,000 French, were embarked to sail to the UK. Now, on the 31st, when Gort received the order to hand over command at Beachhead to Lieutenant General Alexander, first the 3rd Corps, then the 2nd Corps, about 150,000 men, had been shipped back to England together with 15,000 Frenchmen. So from June 1st, the defence at Dunkirk perimeter was taken over by the French 16th Corps. By the time Operation Dynamo ended on June 14th, 113,000 French troops had been shipped to England from a total of near 340,000 Allied troops. It really was a miraculous, withdrawal, and really spared Britain from having to sue for terms. Even though many of those divisions would get back to Britain without artillery, heavy equipment, many of them without trucks, without rifles, it still comprised the main bulk of our fighting force in the European region. So that is to say, during the last 4 days, 75,000 British and 98,000 French troops were embarked. Now the miracle of Dunkirk was only made possible by extremely difficult manoeuvres, which they had to go through, sending destroyers in to pick soldiers up, in the middle of all of this. Now, the RAF, okay, gave assistance as well. They flew over English Channel, engaged the Luftwaffe, engaging the ships, okay. The RAF lost 106 planes in Dunkirk withdrawal, but they did shoot down 156 German aircraft as well. So they accounted more plane for plane than what they had lost. So Hitler, okay, put losses, okay, from Dunkirk. Hitler had scored a crushing victory up to this point. Now the German losses at the moment were 10,200 killed, 42,000 wounded, and 8,500 missing. But he announced that in prisoners alone, in the war in the West so far, they had taken over 1.2 million prisoners. Now, as well as that, okay, the Germans during the Dunkirk withdrawal, the vast encirclement against the Channel, they'd also taken 1,200 pieces of field artillery, 1,200 anti-aircraft and anti-tank guns, 11,000 machine guns, and over 70,000 trucks and vehicles, which had literally been abandoned. Now, Hitler gave a bit of a verdict, okay, he gave a bit of a verdict on his enemies. The Dutch, okay, Hitler said, they put much stronger resistance than we expected. Many of their units fought very bravely, but they had neither appropriate training nor experience of war. For this reason, they were usually overcome by German forces, which were often numerically very inferior. The Belgians, Hitler said, the Belgian soldier too generally fought very bravely. His experience of war was considerably greater than that of the Dutch. At the beginning, his tenacity was astounding. This is now decreasing visibly as the Belgian soldier realises that his basic function is to cover the British retreat. Getting a little dig in there. The British, Hitler said, the British soldiers retained the characteristics which he had in World War I. Very brave and tenacious in defence, unskillful in attack, wretchedly commanded. Weapons and equipment are of the highest order, but the overall organisation is bad. And the French, Hitler's verdict on the French so far in the fighting, very marked differences appear when it comes to assessing the military capacity of the French. Very bad units rub elbows with excellent units. In the overview, the difference in quality between the active and the reserve divisions is extraordinary. So even there, Hitler's pointing out, in a French army, man in the front, you'll get some strong divisions, some weak divisions, some organised divisions, some disorganised divisions. And all that really played a main part also in the massive German attack. Now, many active divisions have fought desperately, Hitler said. Most of reserve divisions, however, are far less able to endure the shock which battle inflicts on morale of troops. For the French, as with the Dutch and Belgians, there's also little the fact that they know that they are fighting in vain for objectives which are not in line with their own interests. Their morale is very affected, as they would say that throughout or wherever possible. The British have looked after their own units and prefer to leave the critical sectors to their allies. And in an essence, at Dunkirk, we pulled off our troops often before Germany. So basically now the Allies had a counter plan. Now Weygand's plan for basically trying to restore a continuous front. Weygand proposed a flexible defensive plan, rather than a static defence line. Now, they tried the static defence line tactic already, and the German armies, the panzers, had punched through. So Weygand, his forces have been reduced by a third now already. Now, prepared to fight a defensive battle against an intact enemy, highly organised. Did he have an armoured reserve capable of meeting the panzers? And in essence, he did not. Now, he claimed to have 1,200 tanks, but actually he had as little as 400 tanks, which were in no way a match for the panzers, and many of them, were light tanks like the Hotchkiss, etc., etc. So the possibility of creating a flexible defensive line using tanks to contain any German armoured attacks was, for the short part, crazy thinking. Now, Maginot Line, which would have had a shorter defensive front, but basically the Rhine would have been lost together with strong points between the Rhine and Moselle, which enabled a front of 220 miles defended by a mere 17 divisions. I mean, that is ridiculous, when you're facing compact and well-organised German tank formations. Now, 3rd Army had transferred from the Saône to the Somme. General Garchery had handed over 8th Army to General Laury, and 8th Army was now attached to the 2nd Army Group with the task of coping with any German attempt to cross the Rhine between Basel and Strasbourg, or to violate neutral Swiss territory. At one point, they thought that Germany might actually violate Swiss territory to actually come around the flank of the Germans. Now, At the same time as this were going on, and they were thinking about reorganising a defensive plan, okay, basically, Churchill and the British were asked about, when is your help coming? And they were mobilising units. 14 divisions were being trained and armed with rifles and machine guns, and Churchill intended to draw on the entire Commonwealth, okay, including 8 Indian battalions, 8 battalions of infantry from Palestine, 14,000 Australians, 2nd Canadian Division, a brigade from Narvik, and maybe a few of the divisions rescued from Dunkirk once they'd been re-equipped. But none of these units were going to be available until the end of June, okay? And by that time, France has been crushed. So, the next German attack begins, okay, facing Weygand's 71 divisions of his new hastily prepared defensive line. The Germans had 143 divisions, okay, 3 of them had come additionally from German-Soviet frontier zone due to the deal there. The French Third Army was about to be attacked by a new and formidable German concentration under Bock. As the wood and steep gradients at Chemain Dam were unfavourable for armour, the new mass panzer assault with its usual air support was to be made on the plain of Picardy. Cleese Panzer Group striking Picardy, from Peronne and Amiens, and the 15th Panzer Corps debouching from Longpre, where Rommel's 7th Panzer Division held the railway bridge. The battle raged for 48 hours, okay, and the French fought hard. They fought real hard. Now, Strasser's 9th Army on Laon sector also scored mediocre success on the first day. At Army Group B headquarters, okay, the first impression was that it would be a long, hard fight. Now, at Ablincourt, General Jungenfeld, commanding the tank battalion, 4th Panzer Divisions, had 9 tanks knocked out within the very first few minutes of the fight. But shortly afterwards, his battalion suffered new losses, and by noon, it only penetrated 6.25 miles into French positions. He actually said, in front of us, every village and wood, one might even say every clump of trees, is literally stuffed with guns and defences. Even small artillery detachments can put us under direct fire. Behind us is a glare of a vicious battle, blah, 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 blah. So the Germans were meeting this new hastily formed defence line and were struggling. Now, on left of the German front, the 9th Army had thrust across the Chemin des Dames and had reached the Aisne at Soissons. Better still on German right flank, okay, the 15th Panzer Corps had broken through the French 10th Army, and Rommel's 7th Panzer Division served forward to Formeray and Forges-l'Eure on June 7th, scattering the French 17th Division. This situation forced General Bessin to order General Frere to pull back the 7th Army into alignment with the 6th Army on its right and the 10th Army on its left. But with this withdrawal, okay, basically amounted to a total sacrifice of their defence line along the Somme rivers. Now, the 7th Panzer Division, exploiting its success on 7th, thrust towards Elbeuf, where the same bridges were destroyed at the approach of his first tanks, then swung northwest to reach the channel at Fécamp. This move trapped, okay, the French 31st and 40th Divisions and the British 51st Divisions. Incredible, resulting in 45,000 prisoners. Now, on June 9th, okay, Rundstedt's Army Group A, reinforced by the tanks, entered the battle with a crushing superiority in men and machines. Its attack was aimed at General Réquin's 4th Army holding the Aisne between Neufchâtel and Attigny, and the French 12th Corps linking the right of the 6th Army with the left of the 7th. Now, 7 French infantry divisions were assaulted by a German army double their number, including many fully equipped panzer divisions. But despite the unequal odds, okay, the French fought superbly. The German 17th Corps on the left of List's 12th Army was held on the Ardennes Canal by General Oblet's 36th Divisions, and in the Wannsee region alone, the German 26th Division lost 600 killed and wounded and over 400 prisoners. The French were really fighting. They were fighting as hard as possible. Now, forces on List's right wing, together with German 2nd Army, had better luck. Neither the French 10th Division around Rethel nor the 2nd Division near Chateau Porcier succeeded in driving Germans back to the north bank of the Aisne. Now, List was therefore able to pass Guderian's Panzer Group across the river, and on dawn, okay, the Panzer Corps struck out from the south. On the afternoon, same day, it were counterattacked in flank by General Busson's armoured group, and the heavy Charbie inflicted sadly heavy casualties. But this was not the last. The collapse at 12th Corps on the left flank at 4th Army opened an enormous breach in the French front, and the panzers streamed right through. So again, the German tactics of hitting them, mass tank formations, punching right through. In fact, Kleist's Panzer Group was now advancing from Peronne to Amiens. It was fanning out towards the south, sending the 16th Panzer Corps towards Lyon and the 14th Motorised Corps towards Saint-Etienne. Now, after a battle on Somme, the battle for Champagne was lost, and it was lost in conditions which wrecked Weygand's hopes for a withdrawal to the lower Seine, the northern region of France and the Marne, and by June 11th he only had 27 divisions to carry on the fight between the western end at Maginot Line and the Seine estuary. He had 27 divisions for 280 miles. That's a division pretty much holding a 10-mile front on its own, which obviously would never withstand the German attack. Now, for this reason, Weygand ordered General Georges at 1315 to execute the order which he had drawn up for a withdrawal to a previous defensive line. So basically, this new front, much longer than previous one, and won it in a week, where the number of available divisions to French had fallen from 71 to only 45. Now, the Germans at this time arrived before Paris, again causing another mass exodus of refugees. And as you can see, the German army is now crashing towards Paris. At Briere on June 12th, Weygand repeated that he hoped to hold on with British help, but on afternoon at the same day he declared in French council, "I'll continue to resist if the council orders me to do so, but as of this moment I have to make this clear, the ending of hostilities must be considered soon." On 13th, driving between shattered French armies on Lower Somme and in the Champagne, the panzers fanned out in a southward advance. Hoth's group headed for Normandy, Kleist using the brigades at Nogent and Romilly Seine made for the massive central and Burgundy, and Guderian swung east, heading for the flank and rear areas of Petelet's 2nd Army Group. Now at this point, from the Siegfried line, Lieb unleashed Operation Tiger, sending 7 divisions from General von Witzlebon's 1st Army against the French Saar detachment under General Hubert. The latter consisted of only the 52nd Division and the Polish 1st Division, but despite the fire of the 229 artillery batteries and entire Luftwaffe Fliegerkorps, the Germans made no notable progress until the 14th. Now, the movement favoured the attack of General Dollmann's German 7th Army, which launched Operation Bear and crossed the Rhine at Markholzheim, on dawn on the 15th. Now, the 27th Corps under General Brandt succeeded in gaining only 1.25 miles on the left bank at Rhine. Really stiff resistance even now, the fighting, but the French basically are starting to collapse, and now peace feelers and talk of armistice are coming. Now, clearly, the Germans are now in the ascendancy. France is now in open collapse. They no longer have the armies to hold off the German attacks, and ultimately the panzers have now punched through the secondary and third German defence lines and are now fanning out in every direction, basically annexing French territory everywhere. Now, this was when Pétain started talk of a peace deal with Germany. Germany would not be nice to France, and would result in a partition with the Vichy government of France running southern France while the Germans controlled northern France, so they could better have more air bases and be there to prepare for any possible British counterattack across the Channel. So basically France was partitioned. Now, even the basic peace deal was signed. Now, this is Hitler gaining revenge. The peace deal would be signed in the same rail carriage that the Germans had to sign surrender at the end of World War I. Hitler and his staff thought that was a very, how can I put it, a very notable public showing there, making the French subdue to the German counterparts in the same rail carriage the Germans had to prior. Now, the French 2nd Army Group, which had been cut off from its commander, General Prételet, were in great danger of being surrounded while carrying out the retreat, which Prételet had ordered on June 14th, and on the 19th, this finally happened, The 1st Panzer Division, advancing from Belfort, met the advance guards at German 7th Army from Mulhouse, that had got there by forced marchers, and in the Vosges, by the link-up, some 400,000 French troops from the 8th, 5th, 3rd and 2nd Armies were now trapped in a massive encirclement. The French did not pull out quick enough, and basically it resulted in a huge surrounding of French forces. So basically now the French are in collapse, okay, the Germans and the Italians are now getting involved in the talks. The Italians are wanting France to have to secede certain ports, bases and warships to Italian control. The Germans are also now imposing their conditions for a ceasefire. So basically, from June 18th onwards, the German advance in west and southwest was a complete victory, a smashing victory. The Germans were just overrunning everywhere. Now, basically, Bordeaux, okay, now declared their town an open town. Okay, they allowed no troops to fortify it. They did not want the treatment of Warsaw or Rotterdam. So Bordeaux were declared an open town, and also France would also declare itself an open town to spare it being smashed to pieces by the Luftwaffe, which they would have done. Now at this point, okay, the Italians decided to launch some attacks in south of France. I won't go through that in much detail, okay, but Italian forces, including a number of Alpini detachments, infantry divisions, artillery brigades, tried attacking France on its southern border. Ultimately didn't do much, took a little bit of territory here or there, but suffered heavy casualties, altogether over 4,000 casualties, only causing less than 300 French casualties. So basically, okay, the campaign in France was wound down to an end. The defeat of France, was a shocking victory for the Wehrmacht. France had surrendered. The partition of France would now begin, resulting in Germany controlling the north of the country and the new Vichy government controlling the south of the country. I could do more talk on the political aspect of that, but ultimately we kind of know what happened. So basically the Battle of France was over. The Germans had streamed across France after punching through those secondary defence lines on the Somme, the Siegfried Line, after forcing the evacuation from Dunkirk of the remains of the BEF and sadly leaving most of its equipment behind, the capturing of its equipment and over 100,000 French troops being withdrawn. The French army shrunk down in size and they were just not able to handle the attack of the panzers. So basically, what were German losses in this stunning campaign? Now, the Germans had lost 27,000 killed, had lost 110,000 wounded, and a further 18,000 were missing, okay? But when we look at some of the others, okay, the Dutch had lost 2,800 killed and 6,800 wounded. The Belgians had lost 7,500 killed and 16,000 wounded, and the British had lost 3,500 casualties with nearly 16,000 wounded, okay? But the French, they had suffered worst of all. The French had lost 92,000 dead. They'd suffered another 250,000 soldiers wounded and no less than 1.4 million prisoners. Just showing the speed of the German attack and how the plan was laid out to lure the French and British forces into Belgium, attack through the Ardennes, which resulted in pinning the British Expeditionary Force plus French divisions against the sea around the Dunkirk perimeter, forcing, nearly 350,000 troops to have to be withdrawn there, added to the 400,000 troops surrounded in the final encirclement, beyond the Siegfried Line. Just crazy numbers. The French army and the Allied armies collapsed. The Germans had scored a stunning victory. Absolutely stunning victory. So basically, okay, the peace deal is signed. France is done. On June 20th, the French deputy left Bordeaux. General Huntseiger presided. 15-30 hours on the following day, okay, General von Tippelskirch, head of the Führer's GHQ staff, led the French delegates into Marshal Foch railway carriage, which the Germans had moved to the clearing of Rithondes. Now there they found standing at the Nazi salute Hitler and Ribbentrop, Hess, Göring, Keitel and Raeder. Now when everyone had taken his place, Hitler gestured to Keitel to proceed. In a thundering voice, Keitel read out a preamble in which the lines were masked by a few chivalrous phrases. Hitler handed each of the French delegates a copy of the armistice terms and left the carriage without having said of a word. There was nothing imposing in either his attitude or his gesture. No discussion worthy of saying followed Hitler's exit, for at the first attempt at modifications made by Huntseiger, Keitel demanded that his task was to comment on the articles of convention prepared by the Führer and not to discuss them. So basically, even though the French delegation said now to discuss some of these points, and basically Rundstedt said no, there's no discussion, you accept them or the war continues. It was as simple as that. Now, okay, basically Article 8 was crucial, okay, and it dealt with the French fleet. Now, Article 8 of the peace deal said the French battle fleet, aside from the portion which is to be left at the disposition of French government for safeguarding France's interests, will be collected in ports which have still to be determined to be decommissioned and disarmed under the control of Germany or Italy, respectively. The designation of these ports will be made according to the peacetime home ports of the ships. Now, that will lead into the guns of Messier Al-Kabir, which I will cover in part 9 of World War II, which we will go through the other events, okay, of what happened around the world and around Europe during the invasion of France, and also Italy's preparations for entry into the war, and then, okay, the incident at Messier Al-Kabir, which I will go through Churchill's reaction to the threat of the French fleet. So that is the part of World War II, part 8. Part 9 will be coming in a few days' time. France has been crushed. Next we go on to some other subsidiaries, then the Battle of Britain. I'm out for now.